Okay, welcome everybody. I think there's 5 of us that, that are doing some introductions. I feel like I'm in a boy band. I'm dressed for it, yeah. Welcome to everybody. It's nice that we've finally assembled a collaboration of several user groups and meetups, and I know that the meetup that I run, the UK Azure user group, is very much a software engineer, dev-focused user group. So it's nice that we can find topics where we sort of coalesce, and the ops, DevOps, and software development community can come together for these sort of meetups. I'm going to pass the parcel with the mic now.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm the co-organizer of the London PowerShell user group, and obviously this topic is also close to our heart, using code to provision infrastructure. So welcome everyone. It's great to see so many faces, old and new. So I'm really looking forward to this meetup.
Hello, I'm Steve. I'm from the from London WinOps user group. So we've been running the user group for about 5 years. And it's all basically because some Linux guy told me you can't do DevOps on Windows. So I said, screw you, and we're going to form a user group to show that we can. Yeah, was anybody at WinOps conference a couple of months back? Cool. So we do an annual conference and everything as well. So glad to see a really huge crowd, and hopefully see you at more WinOps events and WinOps London 2020 in September next year. Thank you.
Hi there, I'm Matteo. I run the London Microsoft DevOps Meetup. It's a very small meetup in fairness, but I see some regulars from there as well, so that's very good to see. We meet here every other month, and we tend to talk about DevOps in every possible way and permutation, even tangentially related to the Microsoft stack. So you will find something for every taste, really.
And I'm the last one. So welcome everyone to this meetup, joint meetup, and all the co-organizers all together. It's glad to see that it's quite popular, and we have a special guest today coming from Australia. So as Richard mentioned, that we are going to cover different types of topics, from the developers, from the architecture perspective. So it's going to be super interesting. Now I would like to go through some presentation, just a welcome. And first of all, there are a few sponsors that we would like to say thank you. New Signature, who was sponsoring with all that pizzas that you enjoyed, and Microsoft Reactor London for the venue, soft drinks, and that hosting us here. So I would like to show some upcoming events from all the meetups that we have aligned for the November and December. So November 13 is going to be the PowerShell user group, which is going to show about how to CI/CD with Neil Kamal. 25th of November, we are running Google Cloud Platform. There are going to be a few talks. We are going to host in Nigel Frank offices. So please show up if you're working with Google Cloud. It's going to be something interesting. We never hosted GCP. December the 2nd is going to be the managed server workstation user and network remotely in the London PowerShell. That's happening in the London Bridge location. And DevOps is hosting 12th of December Microsoft Secure Code Analysis in Action. So mark it down. It's going to be great events. This is the last ones that's coming. Check our meetup websites, register, come and enjoy. As well, as you might know, that there is a Microsoft Ignite happening, and there is a link up that you can have the live stream if you didn't have a chance to attend, and if you are here, you didn't have a chance to attend for different reasons. So it's a great event. We just had a previous meetup here that was showing the keynotes. And I would like all of you to encourage if you have some interesting topic, if you are interested to show something, it doesn't have to be the full hour. It can be just a half an hour. It can be a lightning talk for 5-10 minutes. So please approach us organizers and show some interest and will help you, will support you, and help you to do the presentation. Everyone is very, very welcome, and we had very successful stories from our meetup regular attendees like Osman, that he was just a beginner in PowerShell and did some PowerShell talks already after less than a year. So it's very impressive, and I really would like to encourage you all. And today, as I mentioned, David O'Brien came from Australia. He's going to talk about Azure infrastructure as a code using the real code. And just before he comes to the stage, I would like to invite New Signature that are going to do a short and quick presentation and show what we're doing, how we're doing, and to show all the best bits of it.
Hi guys, my name's Catherine Rhodes. This is my colleague Adu.
Hi everyone.
We're from the talent acquisition team at New Signature. Obviously Martinez is one of our own as well, so just wanted to talk a little bit about us as a company. So we are a Microsoft Gold partner. We are a cloud consultancy managed solutions provider. Just as a little bit about us here, obviously you can see our values on either side as well.
So as I say, yeah, these are the main values that we're trying to achieve at New Signature and part of the whole Microsoft ecosystem as a whole. Within that, we've won quite a few awards with Microsoft, and recently with the 2019 Microsoft Gold Partner of the Year, as well as in the USA. So it's a real privilege to actually be here at the Microsoft Reactor and actually let you guys know about our company and some of the work that we do. We are completely sector agnostics. As you can see, we're working across all industries. Some of the best ones that we like to think about are the security services with the Met and the Ministry of Justice as well. So we're really happy about those areas that we work with as well.
Also, when we won the Partner of the Year this year, we did also get a video made by Microsoft talking about the work that we've done, the British Heart Foundation, which was one of the things that we're most proud of. We do have 13 gold accreditations with Microsoft as well, so this is across those various cloud places. You know a bit more about this than me.
So yeah, as I say, along with the awards, we were actually the first to be awarded the Managed Service Partner as well, Azure Managed Service Partner. So that's a massive accolade for us. And as I say, we're just trying to build on the growth that we've achieved so far with Microsoft and across their ecosystem. We're not a huge company. We're a small to medium-sized business, but we're growing massively. And it's actually just a real privilege for us to speak to all of you here. So thank you very much for that.
As I mentioned, we are a global business. Our head office in the UK is just around the corner from London Bridge Station, but we are backed by Columbia Capital as well. As a business, we do have teams obviously across North America, so the main part of our business is across the US and Canada, and our managed service is actually based around out of Cape Town as well. We do actually also have a very exciting new digital operating model that we are bringing out sort of early next year. This is called NSGo. It's all geared around helping organizations to take advantage of the public cloud and how it is used.
So it's actually built, and we collaborated with Microsoft to use their existing cloud adoption framework. So it's very similar to that, but what we've tried to achieve is to make it totally customizable across all service areas and make it completely bespoke for businesses as a whole. So there can be organic growth for the business. It offers businesses the perfect place to start for their cloud platform engagement. So that's what we've attempted to achieve, and hopefully that product will launch early 2020.
Drivetrain is basically the comprehensive set of scripts, policies, and blueprints and templates based behind NSGo. So it's increasing the velocity of cloud adoption by laying down basically a secure, governed, and compliant Microsoft cloud environment. It is there's some sort of confidential parts to it, but basically that's what we're trying to do, and basically bring down the 6-month engagement down to just a 30-day time frame. That's all we really have to say, but we are going to be around at the end as well if anyone wants to come and say hi, ask any questions about New Signature. It'd be lovely to meet any of you. Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed the pizza.
Let's see, there we go.
Just a quick one. If you have any questions, please wait for the microphone because we are live streaming and recording the session. So please hold back your question, raise your arm, and we come with one of the microphones to you. And then please hold the microphone into your face so everyone can basically hear you. So basically eat it in a way, if you so will. And yeah, that would be really much appreciated by everyone here and also listening online. Thank you very much.
Cool. Well, speaking of questions, if you do have questions, just shout, wait for the microphone. Happy to take questions while I'm doing the session. So no need to wait until the end. Well, hello everybody. It's great to be here in London again. Haven't been in over a year. And yeah, thanks for inviting me and having this opportunity to talk to quite a large crowd, to be honest. For Meetup, at least, it's quite a lot of people. Didn't expect that many, which is good. Good surprise. Well, has anybody never been to Australia? This is not how Australians sound. Yeah, so just in case anybody was wondering, it's not an Australian accent. It's actually a very weird German-Scottish accent. So maybe somebody's heard something like that before. Good. Quick introduction to who is this guy even? So my name's David O'Brien. I've moved to Australia around 6 years ago with my wife and our little puppy in that picture. The heart-shaped lake down there. Anybody following Formula One? Yeah, so that's Melbourne, obviously. I lived just lower bottom of that picture. That's where we lived for the first 2 years while we were in Australia. And before we go into IT, this is my main hobby. If anybody wants to talk to me about something not IT, I'm happy to talk to people about planes. I love planes. I'm an absolute aviation nerd, even more so than IT. All right, back to IT. I'm in Microsoft Azure MVP for a couple of years now, I think 6 or 7 years now. And I've started my own company called Xyrus around 2 years ago, mainly focusing on Azure, obviously, and helping companies move their stuff up to the cloud. If anybody's interested in that, happy to do work in the UK as well. Even post-Brexit, because I'm a UK citizen, so happy to do work here. That's all I'm going to talk about that. If anybody wants to get in touch, Twitter, blog, website, I spend way too much time on social media, so easiest would be Twitter. Topic for today is infrastructure as real code. So I guess everybody's heard about infrastructure as code, right? And probably everybody's doing that already or is thinking about doing it. The idea behind the session was, and I've done this session a few weeks ago in Bangalore at the PowerShell conference there. The idea was to be a bit more inclusive, especially with these sort of conference sessions, meetup sessions. We tend to focus on one thing, and you start talking about code and you start alienating the non-coders, the people that don't necessarily understand or spend most of their time writing Python or Node or any other real code language, right? So I sat down and thought, well, how can I be a bit more inclusive with an actual real example of something that we're going to build on Azure on the cloud? And came up with, well, a lot of things that we're building or as administrators that we want to provide to other customers, internal or external, are APIs. We should be providing services to our customers. PowerShell, being a more familiar language to probably a lot of system administrators, can do absolutely that. In PowerShell, you can absolutely spin up a web API. AKS, Azure Kubernetes services, because everything is that is on containers is cool nowadays, bit of infrastructure. And then real code, infrastructure as real code. I'm going to get into that in a minute, why I'm talking about real code. So reason why PowerShell. It's really the familiarity. I used to be PowerShell MVP when I started in IT in 2009. On my first day, people slapped me on my hand saying, well, if you're going to click around in the UI, you're doing it wrong, write PowerShell. So personal familiarity, and I think especially in the Azure and Microsoft space, it's really PowerShell that most people, or Bash, but I'm not going to talk about Bash, that people are familiar with. And it's really, especially in this use case called Web API, it's really good enough. And the good enough part is what I'm going to get into in the demo. I don't have too many slides, by the way. So it's really good enough to do what we needed to do. Expose an API and respond back with something. Plus, PowerShell really has a very, very active community. Yeah, there's lots of people here. It's open sourced. There's, I don't know how many thousands of issues on GitHub for the PowerShell repo, which is good. Yeah, a lot of people talk to me and say, well, if you have that many issues on a repo, can it actually be that good? Yeah, it's actually that good. It's good that people care about that. And if it didn't have that many issues, people wouldn't be that involved in PowerShell. And I would, to be honest, drop that framework, that tool, whatever, if it's not that active. A few years ago, I started working, before starting my own company, I worked for an AWS partner. And I was the only Microsoft person at that AWS shop. And whenever I said, well, why do I need JQ and org and grep and all of this stuff? I just want to get that one object out of that JSON blob. They started frowning, oh, PowerShell, that's just crap. What a stupid language. So whenever I say, well, this is why you should be using PowerShell, I also start thinking about why not PowerShell. Or as the consultant, I'm talking to you about why you should be using this tool and why you should not really be using this tool. And especially for presenting web APIs for customers, again, internal or external, it doesn't really matter. PowerShell might not be the best fit if you're expecting snappiness. Yeah. Anybody using Slack, the alternative to Teams? Yeah, cool. Slack times out, so if you create like a / command, Slack times out after 30 seconds. The human brain starts timing out way, way before that. Anybody watched people that aren't necessarily in tech clicking on websites? Like they click, nothing happens. What do they do? They click again, straight away, in under 30 seconds. So if you're building a web API that's exposed to real users and not just the perfect users that we are, that understand why things might take a second or two, PowerShell might not be the best fit. It also isn't necessarily the first framework or language when you talk to people about APIs. And there's a website called stackshare.io where you can go and just put a tool name in, and people can, and you can see how many companies are actively using this tool or framework or language or whatever. And sure, it's an opt-in thing. Yeah, people have to report, I am using this tool at this company. But just looking at these numbers, there's almost 6,000 companies using Python. And there's Uber, Netflix, Instagram, PHP, alarmingly high number of almost 42,500 companies. Again, Facebook is all PHP, Slack, Lyft, Node.js, JavaScript, obviously. And then PowerShell, only 308 companies. We can maybe bring that number a bit up by just going on there and putting our own companies in there. Reason why I didn't add any company names as examples is because I didn't know any of those companies. I've never heard of the companies that popped up as number one companies using PowerShell. So maybe if you want to go into front-end dev in your career, or want to change or start out in your career, maybe look at some of those other languages. Might be better for your CV. But really, especially if we're creating things like, there's the self-service cloud, yeah, where we expose services to our administrators or other departments internally, where they can request something like a virtual machine. Yeah, you could expose an API where they can just go onto Slack or Teams, hit that API, and they get a virtual machine or something like that, or a dev environment based on your best practices. In that case, there's really no reason why PowerShell wouldn't fit. If it works for you, go for it. So what are we going to build today? I've already mentioned there's going to be some Kubernetes involved. There's going to be some PowerShell involved. Has anybody worked with Cosmos DB before? I'm probably walking outside of the camera frame. Anybody worked with Cosmos DB before? Yeah, a couple of hands. NoSQL database. You can put it supports a couple of APIs. By default, the SQL API, so you can talk to Cosmos DB, used to be called Document DB. So you can talk to it via SQL APIs, MongoDB, I think there's Gremlin, and one other. Didn't really get that. Yeah, that's what it used to be called. I think it's Table or something like that, Table API. Anyways, by default, you get SQL API, so you can just talk to it via T-SQL, if you're familiar with that. The code that we're going to write, and as in any good cooking show, I've already prepared that in the oven, the code that we're going to write is going to deploy a Docker image running a PowerShell API on Kubernetes, talking to a Cosmos DB database backend. And the idea is, usually I bring Tim Tams with me. I didn't. I had some with me. They disappeared suddenly. But do people know what Tim Tams are? Yeah, okay. Australian cookies. And the API that I'm exposing or that I'm building is a ticket API. So you put your name and your and some other personal data in it, which also doesn't necessarily work in the EU because there's no T's and C's on my API. You put that in, and then at the end of the session, I just go and get a random person out, and they get all the Tim Tams. So that's the idea behind this application. The tool that we're using for that is called Pulumi. Anybody heard of Pulumi before? A couple of hands. All right. Who's using Terraform? A couple of more hands. Interesting. Good. Who's using native ARM templates? Huh. Didn't take any pictures, but I think there was some overlap. Who's using Terraform and ARM? Huh. All right. Anybody not using any of those? Just PowerShell, probably? Yeah, straight scripting. Right. the holy bash script in prod, holy PowerShell script in prod, that everything hangs on here. So Pulumi. Actually, and one other, Polaris. Polaris is going to be the PowerShell web framework, web API framework that I'm using. It's from the actual PowerShell team, so it's in the PowerShell GitHub org. I'm pretty sure that you can get those slides later on. Where's the organizers? Are you going to send those slides around? Yeah, okay, so you're all going to get those slides later on, so you don't have to take pictures. Happy for you to take pictures, obviously, but don't need to. Polaris is like Flask in Python. And we're going to see the code in a second. You create API endpoints, get, post, put, whatever, in PowerShell. So Polaris is going to run inside of our Docker container. So why Pulumi? I'm a big fan of Pulumi. Probably every second tweet nowadays mine is about Pulumi and why I love Pulumi. And the reason for that is, one, it's open source. Pretty much everything nowadays is open source. And some are actually going back to being more closed source nowadays for reasons that happened over here. Elastic, people heard of that? Yeah. But I love that it's open source. It's very active. They're very active on Slack. They have a Slack channel that you can just sign up to. The founders are ex-Microsoft and ex-AWS. They're really nice guys. I met them in March. I visited their offices in Seattle. They're about 2 years old. Pulumi just hit version 1 point something. So they're at V1. Obviously, V1 doesn't necessarily mean much. Looking at Terraform, which is still at version 0.12, right? Yeah. Having just undergone major refactoring from 11 to 12 and HCL 1 to 2. It's open source. Pulumi supports a lot of providers. Yeah, just like Terraform, they support Azure, AWS, GCP, Docker. They have a Helm provider. They have a VMware provider, I think. They have lots of providers. If Terraform has a provider, Pulumi has the provider as well. And why is that? Mainly because Pulumi takes the Terraform providers, recompiles them into Pulumi providers. Open source, everybody. It doesn't mean, though, and whenever I talk to customers about that, they're like, so why don't we just use Terraform then? It doesn't mean that you're running Terraform. Yeah? Just internally, the Pulumi binary uses that Terraform provider to expose the endpoints to you. So you're not writing Terraform, you don't have to install Terraform, you're not doing any Terraform. They're actively working on going away from the Terraform recompilation thingy and using their own compilation from the Azure, AWS, and whatever Swagger definitions to their own binaries. It is real code. And by that, I mean it's actual code. It's Python, it's JavaScript, TypeScript, Node.js, Golang. They're actively working on a .NET provider. They just created a pull request a few days ago. A guy from, I want to say Lithuania, might also be Latvia, one of the two. He's working on that .NET provider at the moment. I had a chat to the Pulumi guys a while ago, and they are envisioning that once the .NET provider is out, people are going to start writing PowerShell in Pulumi. So, and once we look at the code, you can probably figure out what that might look like. Real code, so we're talking about infrastructure as code, right? We've had ARM templates, which are JSON files, right? That's not code. It's actually pretty advanced nowadays, an ARM template. In my opinion, it's much better than Terraform in some ways. Fight me. The reason why I'm saying that is because HCL, in my opinion, is very far away from code. Yeah, it's a very weird syntax. There's no proper way of doing any ifs or loops or any of that. And whenever I talk to Terraform, like hardcore Terraform people about that is, they say, well, that's good. It shouldn't be like that. Yeah, it should be very descriptive. You should know what is where, and you shouldn't have any, well, if it's in this environment, if this variable is set, it should be like that. Shouldn't exist. And then I always say, well, but in reality, we do need that. So real code gives you all of that. Yeah? Whatever you can do in Python, whatever you can do in Node.js, Pulumi supports all of that, including you can, your PyLint, your linter works, your Cocoa framework, your testing framework in Node.js works. All of these things that people that use those languages are used to work just out of the box. Obviously, Pulumi, they need to make money. They have a web service that you can use, a bit like Terraform Enterprise used to be. The Pulumi web service gives you hosted state, so you don't have to go and deploy an Azure storage account where you put your JSON file or your state file in. That's all done for you with Pulumi. They have secrets management. They have role-based access control. They have a versioning of your stacks. So all of that is built into the service. And for small teams, all of that is also free. Small teams, I think that's 3 users or something like that. Most of my customers, however, because of that last bit, or second last bullet point actually, don't use the service. Yeah, they have pipelines, they already have role-based access control, they already have secrets management using Azure Key Vault. They just deploy a storage account, tell Pulumi to use that storage account for state storage. And if everybody who has Terraform experience knows what that means, people that don't have Terraform experience and are stuck with ARM don't know what state is. It's just whatever Pulumi is just deployed, they put that into a JSON file, and next time around, when you run Pulumi, Pulumi compares what is in your code to what's in the state, shows you the diff, asks you, do you really want to do that? And then you go. In ARM, it's always I hope it works. For now. Well, Ignite is happening at the moment, and there's things already, I think it's already announced. They already announced a what if months ago, right? Yeah. So ARM is also going to get a what if this week, I think, or something like that. I don't even know what date, but the whole state thing, ARM is going to get that as well. End of presentation. Let's go into my most favorite. Let's do that one first. So, to create a new Pulumi stack or Pulumi project, you just run Pulumi new, and let's make that a bit smaller. you run Pulumi new, and then you are being moved, or yeah, you can scroll through this. Let's do that again. That might be a bit better. You can walk through this menu and say, well, I want an Azure Python project. Give it a project name, let's say London User Group, a description, stack name dev, and because I'm not using the service, can I scroll that up? No, I can't. Because I'm not using the service, I have to put a secret passphrase in, which is something that the Terraform people are also not going to be familiar with, because Terraform stores secrets how? Do people know?
In state file.
In the state file, and how? In plain text, correct. And then people say, well, doesn't matter because you secure your storage account. You secure the thing that you put your state file in. Sure. Of all those people that use Terraform in production, I assume you're using it in production, how many had to go and edit the state file before? A couple of hands, right? Yeah, yeah, because that's a thing. Yeah, unfortunately, you have to sometimes go and something screws up your state file, and you have to manually go and edit that state file, which means that suddenly people have access to that state file with your clear text passwords in it. Not good. That passphrase is going to encrypt all your secrets that you put into your Pulumi project. Mm-hmm. And now we have to do that again. Public Azure location, I'm always in Sydney. All right, so that created the Pulumi project, and we can take a quick look at what that actually looks like. Because I've picked Python, we've got our requirements.txt with the Pulumi requirements and the Pulumi Azure provider in it. The YAML file here is per stack. So we've got a generic YAML file and a YAML file, a stack configuration, essentially, per stack, which means that every environment variable that you want for your stack, for your project, you can put that into these YAML files. And then based on which environment or which stack you are in, could be dev, could be prod, could be something like that. That's what stacks are supposed to be. You can have different configs. And let's take a look at the actual code. Especially if you're familiar with PowerShell or Terraform, and even better if you know Python, it probably doesn't look too foreign, right? All the way to the top, we're importing our dependencies. And then we create our resource group by calling resource group, with giving it a name called resource group. And the example creates a storage account, giving it the parameters that are required. We know that from ARM, we know that from Terraform, the required parameters. And we can then create an export if we wanted to. It's fairly straightforward. I have to admit, I'm not a Python developer. I'm not a Node.js developer. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a good developer in general. But using Pulumi, especially in a good IDE with, for example, VS Code, which is set up for your language, is actually pretty easy, even if you're not the most advanced developer in that language. Before we go and start changing that, we can take a look at, actually, let's do that in here, how to execute that. So Pulumi preview is going to ask for the passphrase again, so I'm just going to export that as my super secret password. First thing that happens is, obviously, I haven't installed, I'm not inside of my virtual environment, I haven't installed the requirements. So let's go and follow what Pulumi told me to do. So we're creating our development environment. We're creating a virtual environment, and then we jump into that environment. Oops. We're now in this virtual environment and install the requirements that we need to actually run Pulumi. Once that is set up, which should be done any second, there we go. We can now say Pulumi preview. Come on. There we go. Pulumi preview is going to take the Python script and check what I've configured in that script against what's currently in state. Because it's a completely new stack, it's going to tell me that, well, the stack is new, so we have to create that. The resource group is new, so we have to create that resource group, and the storage account is also new, so have to create that. So let's skip the whole constantly passing in my password. Next step, once we're happy with what Pulumi said it would do if we were to actually do it, we can call it Pulumi update or Pulumi up, doesn't necessarily matter. By default, it does another preview and will ask me, do I really want to perform this update? I actually like that it's by default no. I'm not sure if anybody's done much PowerShell on Azure. Most of the, especially destructive commandlets, are by default on yes. So delete or remove AZ resource group, even without force, yeah, it's going to ask you, but even if you leave it empty, so it's going to prompt, but even the empty by default has a Y in it. So if you go enter, enter, there goes your resource group. Just a random fact. So yeah, happy to do it. Stack gets created, resource group gets created. Obviously, the other resources are going to get created as expected. Once that is done, and the storage account usually takes a couple of seconds, obviously storage accounts should, or storage account names should really be randomized, right? Pulumi takes care of that by not even providing a name. So it creates that automatically. Yeah. Microphone.
It's an easy one.
An easy one, okay.
Sorry, you haven't really connected to Azure yet.
Correct.
So where are you creating those things?
In Azure. Yeah, so Pulumi by default takes the tokens out of your environment. So because that environment is already authenticated to Azure using AZ login,
All right. Okay.
it will use the authenticated session that's currently in place.
Because in that, where is it making the connection? Or, even if it's, where is the link? Well, this just, sorry.
Yeah, good question, yeah. So in my preparation, I ran AZ login.
Right.
And Pulumi takes that environment, the connection strings out of that environment. Which means that if we were to go over here into the weird new Azure portal, does anybody like that thing on the side? Oh, that's 4 hands, right. 4 hands out of quite a lot of hands. The rest uses PowerShell. The rest has never ever seen that portal, right? Like, what is this thing even? Right. What if we called it, or we just called it resource group? There you go. That's our resource group. And it should only have that one storage account in it. Yeah.
In your code, you have specified resource group name as resource group. Why
Yes.
we have this 610A72E4?
Yes. Because Pulumi adds that as a random string.
And if I don't want to?
You can override that here. Yeah. So that, sorry, let's go here and name. If I were to just put that string in here, it would take that string.
Okay, and if you don't mind, one other quick question.
I
When we run Pulumi plan, it has had a reference to a dev JSON file. What's inside of the JSON file?
That's state. So because I'm not using the service for my demos, because I would be just cluttering the service, I'm using a local state file. And if we're going to take a quick look at that, that's the Pulumi state file. So it's JSON. And there's our storage account. So we can see replication type, LRS, account tier, standard, blob encryption, true, all of that is set in here. That's our state file, the JSON file. That, go away. Ubuntu wants to update to 1910, and I don't. So that's the state file that once I'm going to make a change, Pulumi is going to compare my change against. Usually, you don't even have to worry about that. Yeah, just like in Terraform, where we usually don't necessarily worry about the state file. Same in Pulumi, we usually don't worry too much about that state file. So back to the, where does it even create the resources? Authenticated session. Pulumi also supports environment variables, service principals, application, and certificate authentication.
So can I create this first and then before it actually goes and updated, then provided some kind of point to some resource where you can.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah.
Can be exported as well. I mean, if I, for example, that.
I'm going to repeat the question.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Can this be exported as well? So if it was a disconnected session, I created all my stuff, but without updating it, say I want to update it to numerous different places, but same script.
Yeah, so could you use that one script so just so I understand the question, so could you use that one script and point it against not multiples, but one after the other, right? Yeah, so absolutely. So being a consultant, we have these scripts ready as our blueprints instead of using blueprints. We have these ready to go and deploy these into multiple customer environments. And we make central changes to these things, and these changes kick off pipelines in customer environments as well.
Speaking of consulting work and basically reusing the code, does it support any sort of like models like Terraform does or PowerShell
Yes.
where you can modelize stuff?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to go into that today and actually building modules, but because it's just code, yeah, Python, Node.js, just create your JavaScript or Node.js packages, create your Python modules, absolutely. Whatever the language supports, Pulumi will be able to support that as well. Absolutely. And speaking of, the actual code that we're doing, or of our application. So we've seen the config file, yeah, that YAML file. And that YAML file defines, I think I'm not supposed to walk too far over here. Just going to take that risk. The YAML file defines the input variables. Yeah, we don't want to hard code stuff because, as I have had this morning, I hard coded something because laziness, no excuse, laziness, changed something, and I thought I changed it everywhere. The whole deployment failed, obviously, because I've missed one bit. I actually mistyped London, weird error. But we obviously put all of our environment variables into the YAML file, and using the config.get method, we can pull in the variables from our YAML file. And I can quickly show that. Example, VM size. Kubernetes clusters obviously run on virtual machines. And the VM size for the stack is configured here. SSH key to connect to the Kubernetes cluster if we needed to. And that should really be a secret value. For one of my last demos, I had this as a clear text, just to show people that in state, that would show up in clear text, and I then changed it to a secret. Anyways, in our Python, as before, we create our resource group. AKS runs inside of our virtual network with a subnet, and talking about modules and Terraform, these are really good candidates. Yeah? A virtual network, we need a network with multiple subnets based on good practices that we describe or we prescribe. That should really or usually goes into a module, into an externalized module, so that people that need that just pull that module in from a feed and have that locally then next to their code and just pass in their parameters, like their side ranges. Because we're creating Docker images, we also need an Azure container registry. And then there's the whole Kubernetes shebang. Cosmos DB, and our exports so that we know how to connect to stuff. That is probably very similar to what you would be doing in Terraform as well, or ARM, right? You create all your resources, and then suddenly we have to worry about, okay, cool. So how do we get our application on there, right? I always tell my customers, the application and infrastructure is really merging. It obviously depends on the environment that you're in. Kubernetes could potentially be maintained by a completely different department, but ideally, your app, your cluster, your infrastructure, your resource group, you're responsible for all of this, right? That's the whole theory. Which means that now you have to go and worry about how do I actually build this Docker image. Yeah, we have our Docker file here, which doesn't actually do too much. I'm going to show the PowerShell script in a second. But now we have to build and push this Docker image up to our registry. How would you usually do that? Would be a separate external step, right? Script, a PowerShell script maybe, or a pipeline step that does it. Something else, a PowerShell script, a bash script, something. But it's not part of your actual infra code. Pulumi, because it's, again, actual code and just code, Pulumi supports something like this. Actually, it's not even Pulumi supporting it. It's just Python. Yeah, there's a Docker module for Python, a Docker package, sorry. And because it's Python, you can just import that and say, well, whenever we're not in an update, so whenever we're not calling Pulumi update, which is that, runtime is dry run, whenever that is false, so we're actually doing the deployment, build my image.
Sorry, can I ask a question now?
Sure.
Pulumi update is supposed to be actual deployment. Pulumi preview is supposed to be dry run. Or I'm missing something.
Yeah, might have been a brain fart. Sorry.
Okay.
I mentioned that when I came in. Usually my jet lag isn't this bad, but I arrived on Friday morning. I should really be all right today, but for whatever reason, this trip completely threw me off. Is dry run only runs on update when it's false, yeah? So dry run means preview, and is dry run equals false means we're in an update. I might have said it the other way around, sorry.
Yeah, just checking.
Yeah, good catch. I'm also just checking if people actually listen. That's good. That's another question.
Thank you. So you said that Docker is a Python-supported module that you can import. So how much of this that you're showing us depends on the language we chose? Because we could have chosen Python, we could have chosen Node, we could have chosen one of the other languages. Yep. So how many of those are across all of those languages?
Yep. So everything that I'm showing today works in all the languages. Python is actually the least supported language at the moment in Pulumi. So in Node.js, Pulumi actually has its own Docker provider, where Docker images are real Pulumi resources. In Python, they do have a Docker module in Pulumi, but it's still very work in progress, and they're actually saying that they're refactoring it, so don't use it. But that doesn't necessarily matter, because if there is a module or package or whatever language you're in that does, for example, Docker, or I don't know, ServiceNow. If there's a ServiceNow SDK for Python and you need to do something during your deployment against ServiceNow, do it in here. Yeah, you don't have to externalize that into a Bash or PowerShell script later on. You can have it all inside of this one script, one place. So really, I'm just pulling in a third-party library, calling it, and using it as if it was part of the infrastructure, because it really is part of everything that I need. It's part of the application, so it's part of the infrastructure. Another example is I'm actually defining a function here in Python. Docker login and push, because I only want to push when I've actually built the Docker image. And for that, I need my registry username and password. I need to authenticate to ACR because we're not making our registry public. I need to log in and then push to my repository. And that should really be a variable. Using that function, yeah, just like in any other Python script, I can make sure that it only runs during the update later on. Mainly because, that's just on that border. So if that ran on a preview, the arguments passed into Docker client login wouldn't be available, right? Just like in Terraform. Username, if the ACR doesn't exist, yeah, the registry, if it doesn't exist, then obviously we don't know what the username or password is. So we need to make sure that it only runs when those values are available. And we can do that using some built-in Pulumi methods, like the output all, and then apply our defined function. Yes. Microphone. I'm just going to repeat. People are busy.
That's okay. Because we're using Python at the moment, it's an interpreted language, not a compiled language.
Yes.
And going through all of that, and when it generates that preview point saying creating, is it also, I mean, how is it sure that it's, because earlier in the conversation you said, I think you said it will say whether it says going to be successful or not, but here it'll say creating or not.
Mm-hmm.
But because this is an interpreted language, does that mean that it's compiling it somehow to work out whether everything is in place for it to say, yes, it will be successful?
All right, so just to condense that into repeating it, how does, because it's not a compiled language, how does Pulumi know that everything is actually in place to properly say it needs to create something or not?
Or there's a syntax error or something?
So a syntax error would be a Python linting, or if I make, what's a good syntax error?
Output space dot all. Let's call that image something else, you know, you use the variable image.
So because it's going to run the actual, it is going to run the actual Python script.
Its own memory?
In memory,
Right.
yeah. It will know if there's, once it hits the error.
This is running at the local memory level.
Yes, yeah, so it's locally, yeah. Also, that might not, yeah, there we go. let's try to make it fail later on. Usually I try to make demos work. All right, so that's just one example of where we can pull third-party libraries into our infrastructure code. Yeah? Going away from that mentality that it's just infrastructure and then something else is the application. It's all becoming one thing, right? The actual API, going away from Python for a second, the actual API, the PowerShell script that is going to run inside of our Docker image, uses Polaris. So going to the Docker file, we can see that I'm installing the Polaris PowerShell module and the Cosmos DB PowerShell module. Always ends up on that border. Anyways, the Polaris and Cosmos DB PowerShell module. The way, and right now what I'm exposing is two API endpoints, essentially. A GET and a POST. That's really all that we need right now. And Polaris has these commandlets that they give us to describe an API or a path or route, actually. By saying post route, route, not route. In Australia, don't say you're being routed somewhere. Or do, maybe. We're not PG-13, right? So a post route, the path in our API is /users, and then we have to say, well, if somebody hits that endpoint with that method, post, what do we want you to do? And Polaris exposes a couple of objects, the request object, a return object, and a couple of others, where we can go and access, for example, the request headers that are being passed into our API. Like I said, it's like a ticket, like a lottery application that I've built. So first name, last name, and location, and that is being put into Cosmos DB. So every person that participates in this lottery gets its own entry in my Cosmos DB table, and they get a response, a friendly response back with a ticket ID. So once that is posted, obviously we also want to go and get the information back out again. I want to know all the people, and I also want to know one particular. And it's really just plain PowerShell. If you've written PowerShell before, there's no magic in here. All we need to do is we need to figure out how to talk to Cosmos DB in PowerShell, and that's dead easy as well. I just did something that I hated at university. Well, that's trivial, and move on. So it's actually fairly simple to talk to Cosmos DB, especially in PowerShell. All we need to do is create that context, which is really your connection string to Cosmos DB, and then the query that you want to execute. Remember, I said Cosmos DB by default is SQL API, so if you want to get all the entries, it's select star from C, which is the default collection. And if somebody passes in a ticket ID to our query, to our API, then just execute this query here. Yes. Over here. Here. Not him.
Sorry, a quick question. When you did the post above, you also did a return. Is that just for the demo here, or is that particularly for this particular? Because a post is not supposed to return anything. Is that just for the demo?
Yeah, that's just for the demo.
Oh, all right, okay.
Yeah.
Not particularly to. Okay,
No.
thank you.
No. No.
Thanks.
That's really
Just to make it easier for us.
correct. And then Start Polaris, we're listening on port 80, or we're running it on port 8080. Polaris falls very much into the good enough category at the moment. I was meaning to work on a couple of other PowerShell frameworks for web APIs. At my last demo, we managed to crash my web APIs with just a handful of people actually posting something to the API. So I have to go and figure out how many run spaces and how to make that a bit more stable. But let's say I'm not going to ask people here in the audience now to post something. And I'm just going to demonstrate that, because in my last demo, I said, so this is the IP, go post, and then I did the demo, and it failed for me. And people were very polite in this audience, and nobody said, why, but it worked for me. So I was under the impression, because I got all the errors up here, that it just didn't work, and it actually worked for pretty much everybody else, but nobody told me. So I'm just going to say, don't use this API at the moment. Now you have to. So obviously, I'm going to use PowerShell. And method post, which means it's going to obviously hit that post route on the user's path. And I'm passing in the first name, last name, and location query parameters. And this is, again, another example for PowerShell might be good enough, but doesn't necessarily have to be. There we go. So it does take a couple of seconds, because PowerShell has to go and start up, build the context, talk to Cosmos DB, put something into Cosmos DB, and then respond back. As I said, and as just like the gentleman pointed out here, not supposed to usually return.
Yeah, that's what I'm confused about. How did it actually display to actually take the return value?
So how did it actually return that value? So Polaris has this response object. They don't check where you're using that response object. Yeah? So whenever you say response.send, that will be sent back to the caller. So, yeah.
Just a quick clarification on the deployment. Is it constantly running, or is it serverless? Or you said it has to spin up?
So the the Polaris web app does run all the time. So we're calling start Polaris, which boots up the Polaris web server, essentially, inside of your Docker image. or the container, once the container boots up. It does constantly run, but I had a chat to the PowerShell team when they were in Bangalore a few weeks ago, and they said, well, we have to build something inside of the web server to actually respond to your request. That's what PowerShell obviously is running, the PowerShell process is running, the web server is running, but they take like a second or something like that to actually go and do the thing that we're asking them to do.
So why don't you have this while throw?
That's a workaround because Polaris eventually just goes and.
What if it was started as a job?
Yeah, you could just start it as a job. Yeah. It's also the PowerShell script itself. So the web server is not blocking. The process will not block the calling process here. So entry point, we're calling PowerShell. I think in the next PowerShell version, I have to go and change that to, what's the headless PowerShell binary called? A W at the end. Yeah, so preview 7, right? PowerShell 7?
7 preview 6 is going to have that.
Yeah. So there's going to be a console PowerShell and a headless PowerShell. So.
Sorry, a stupid question. What is headless PowerShell?
There's no console, no TTY. So once that is deployed, and once that runs, as we've seen, we can hit our endpoint. And if we wanted to make a change, for example, let's run some more containers. So
If you put that on a web browser, the same string without the window, would that do the same as a web browser as well?
yeah. So if I was to proper browser, and depending on what method they use by default, if I was to take that string, that URL, and put that into the browser, would it do the same thing? Yes, it would.
I would get the same response back as well.
Yeah. So let's say we're going to change from 11 containers to 15. With ARM, that would be code review. Does it actually make sense? What are you doing? You've changed from 11 to 15. Okay, yeah, so you wanted 15, and you didn't fall asleep. What happened to me on the plane the other day, and just added, I don't know, 1,000 ends to the 15. It actually happened. Was very happy that I had everything in Git, because I had weird issues all over the place. So resources, want to update, 16 unchanged. ARM eventually is going to have that as well, similar to that. And we can see that the Kubernetes app deployment, that is going to change. And I could make that diff even nicer to get a bit more detail. But I can then say Pulumi update. I can also skip the preview. And eventually, the number of pods here is going to, so that's the Kubernetes dashboard. The number of pods is going to go up from 11 to 15. It's currently doing its thing. Let's see, still 11. Updating. There we go, 4 more containers. So that's pretty much, I can obviously go and destroy all of it again. Just saying Pulumi destroy, and all of that infrastructure goes away. And that's pretty much my demo. Yeah, lots of questions. Let's start with the questions first.
Pulumi supports the activities or solutions that are already running. So suppose I have invested too much on my infrastructure as a code approach, right, via ARM packets. Does Pulumi have the capability of leveraging the investment that I've already made and being on board with Pulumi?
Depends on what you've invested in. So ARM templates, you can obviously just go and call ARM templates. Yeah, there's a provider to call an ARM template. If you've done Terraform, then there's a way to convert from Terraform into Pulumi. So they have a TF2 Pulumi binary. However, right now, and I've raised an issue on GitHub around that, they only support HCI 1 and not HCI 2. It seems like nobody supports HCI 2 at the moment, not even VS Code, the extension, which means all of your code has red squiggly lines all over the place. Yeah, but yes. So I've already moved a couple of my customers from Terraform or ARM into Pulumi.
The other question is, since Pulumi supports multi-cloud vendor support, so I'm assuming these scripts that we are writing, right, are not agnostic of the provider. So if I'm writing a Pulumi script, it's very using whatever the provider, right? It's very specific for that cloud provider.
Yes.
If I have to be agnostic, means if I want to use this infrastructure and move it from Azure to AWS, I have to write from scratch.
Yes, because multi-cloud is a myth or a lie.
But on the positive side, you can invent if in your code.
Correct. Yeah. So obviously,
So you have one stack.
So you could go and just write lots of modules and just say if Azure, call that module, and just pass in your parameters. However, as soon as you get to VM size or something like that, you have to go away from that and say how many cores you want, and then hope that you have 2 cores and 6 gig RAM on both platforms. Otherwise, you're going to have to guess what's the closest to that. Multi-cloud's a lie. They do support multiple cloud providers, yeah, and you can put application A with Pulumi on AWS, and you can put application B with Pulumi on Azure, and C on GCP. Absolutely go for it. I think we're still a couple of years away from actually being multi-cloud. And I'm again on record of saying that.
Yeah, and probably as extension to the previous question, can it import already created resources? So let's say if I have some components I will need to maintain now as infrastructure as a code, can I run some scripts to create definition for something that's already created?
As in existing infrastructure?
Yeah, like let's say someone deployed a VM for me,
yeah,
and now we are deploying stacks that will include that VM. So can we import definition?
Not yet.
Not yet.
So they're actively working on importing existing infrastructure into your stack.
Okay, sounds good.
There's also, yeah. Is that stuff on GitHub? Yes, I'm going to make that public later on, though. Yeah. So follow me on Twitter. and do ask me about if it's not going to happen tonight. I'm on the train to Paris tomorrow morning, so I'm probably going to do it then. So let's go over there first. Yeah, okay?
Taking you back to the setup of the VNet and the subnets, and a real-world example where maybe we've got VNet peering set up, and we're trying to maybe add an address prefix. Now, obviously, that can't be done without taking VNet peering off. How straightforward is Pulumi to be able to resolve that problem of the fact you can't get desired state from your call because something in the Azure API is physically stopping you? How would you work around that in Pulumi?
Sorry. So the
So you can't add an address prefix
yeah.
to a VNet that has Pulumi.
Oh right, yeah, okay, yeah. Well, Pulumi is not going to make it work either.
No,
But
in Terraform you can track the exception.
sure, yeah. So you can find all of that and you can catch all of these things just in code, right? So you have to figure out, is somebody trying to do something that is not possible, and then you expose that error back to the user. Is that
I guess it would be even simpler because you can write in the stack to basically destroy your peering as part of Pulumi script, then change address space, and then recreate the peering.
you could? I probably wouldn't, yeah, because depending on the peering, you're completely destroying something that isn't necessarily easily recreatable.
Yeah, but you can write logic, you write a script, so you can put it in a logic in a common sense, then you can.
Yeah, so it's code. You can do whatever you want. That's probably the answer. But if the platform doesn't support it, Pulumi is not going to support it. But you can absolutely catch input that somebody's trying to do on something that isn't able to actually do the thing that they want to do. Yeah? All right. Over there. No, all the way over there. You had way too many questions already.
Daniel, lady near the window.
At the window.
Ah, sorry, I didn't see that.
Hi, my question really was about Azure Key Vault. It's one of the things we kind of struggle with the integration. So I'm just wondering how you can actually use that in Pulumi, and if you're able to do the references like we normally do with the ARM template to grab your secrets from Key Vault.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pulumi supports Key Vault as a secret management store. So instead of putting the secrets into your YAML file, even though they're encrypted, right, with your passphrase, you can reference and you can get secrets from a Key Vault during runtime. So you reference them. Don't have a demo script for that, but it's documented on the Pulumi documentation. You can get secrets from Azure Key Vault or AWS parameter store or any other. They have Key Vault, parameter store, and a third one, probably Google, that they integrate with. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so by default, if you don't integrate into a third-party secret management store, all your secrets go into that config file. But you can configure Pulumi to not go into and search for your secrets or config in that file, but get your secrets from Key Vault.
I have a question about, can we write test scripts?
Yes.
With Pulumi?
Yes.
So I want this environment, and did you create my environment correctly or not?
Yes. Yes, you can. There's a really good blog article by Joe Duffy, one of the Pulumi founders, who walks through actually doing functional and verification tests on your infrastructure based on Pulumi. It's probably Node that they're going to use, but same applies to Python. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. My question is slightly related to the network part. When you say infrastructure, for me, as I understand it, that it's to do with networks, firewalls, load balancers, server setup, and all that. So does that mean you can achieve all the functionality using this?
Yes.
In the code?
Yes.
Right.
Pulumi just talks to your cloud APIs.
Right.
So if the platform supports it, and there's a Pulumi provider, then Pulumi can just go and create the resources. So we've stood up whole shared services environments based on the Azure blueprints in Pulumi. including peerings, VNet peerings, including Azure Active Directory domain services, firewalls, front doors, all of these things.
Very powerful.
It is. And really, it's nothing new, really. The concept writing actual code is pretty new, at least for Microsoft, or at least on Azure. AWS already had a troposphere for quite a while, Python framework for CloudFormation. AWS now has the CDK, the Cloud Development Kit, where they natively already support writing their infrastructure in code. But yeah, if Terraform does it right now, Pulumi can do it too. And if neither of them have it, Azure has Python SDKs or Go SDKs, Ruby SDKs, whatever. You can just pull them in and just talk straight to the APIs.
So is C# supported?
Not yet. So like I said, they just created a pull request the other day for .NET.
Because that might work very well with multi-cloud part, because you can segregate. Anyway, different story.
Yeah.
Are there any resources to actually go and read a case study or something before? Because I know this is a very tiny demo example, but to get to any depth or experiment with it, are there any case studies, anything you'd recommend?
Well, the Pulumi website.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, pulumi.io.
Sorry, one more question from me. We talked about support of the APIs, but how granular this markup language is in respect of, like a definition of the objects? Does it actually pick up all the API parameters and they can be as granular as with ARM, or it has certain limitation like Terraform does?
So it's obviously going to have lots of stuff in here. There's the name, ops, that's Pulumi. It will pick up all the subnets. So it will pick up all the parameters that are currently exposed in that out of the SDK.
So it basically will pick up everything that will be sitting in Python SDK for Azure.
Yes. Well, right now, which is in the Terraform provider. Yeah, like I said, they take the Terraform provider and recompile that into their own providers. So if it's not in Terraform at the moment, so in the Terraform Azure provider, then it's not in the Pulumi provider. But if you need, like if there's a preview service that you need, which is not in Terraform, so it's not in Pulumi, but it's in the official Azure SDK, you can just pull that in and it will pick up all the parameters.
Okay, so it will be the same markup language, markup definition of the resource, but it will pick up.
Yeah, because that's not markup or a DSL, right? That's Python.
Okay, so it's just picking up from Python or any other inputted module.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So just like Docker, right? I think I called it client. Yeah, Docker client. Same experience is what you get for all the Pulumi stuff.
Okay, sorry. Then slightly to my own benefit, if it can pick up everything from Azure Python SDK, why it needs Terraform?
Because they haven't gone through the trouble of using the official Azure SDKs so far. Reasons because it's not that easy at the moment to apparently compile from the Azure SDKs. So they're instead relying on Terraform, HashiCorp, which has a much bigger engineering team to do all of that. It's open source, right? Yeah, they're planning on going straight to the Azure SDKs and Azure APIs very soon. At least that's what they told me a few months ago, and still a couple of weeks ago.
Sorry, from your personal experience, how familiar Microsoft support team is about Pulumi services?
Probably not that much. Yeah, so I had a couple of chats to Alexander Franke and Satya Vel on the ARM team and Brian Moore on the ARM team, and they wanted to figure out why do we like, so there's a couple of MVPs that really like Pulumi and go and talk to people about Pulumi, and they wanted to know why. Yeah, why not Terraform? Why not ARM? Obviously, why not ARM? But also, why not Terraform? So we gave them our reasons. Some of them you've heard today. The support team, much less aware of Pulumi than they are of Terraform. Yeah. So don't expect any direct help from Azure support on Pulumi issues. But it's probably the same experience if you have a Terraform issue.
Not necessarily, because they now officially support Terraform implementation, so
Sure.
they can't say that, like, oh, you have to deploy it via ARM or via anything else.
Sure. Yeah.
Sorry. So it's partly sort of coming from one of the questions that came earlier before. So if Pulumi can use Azure's SDKs for whatever language as well as Terraform, how does Pulumi work in terms of its graphing? Does it use Terraform to actually produce its graphing, or does it have its own?
It will use its own, based on its own state file.
Right. So bearing that in mind, does it have the same limitations, so we say, that Terraform has with its own graphing, where
A very large infrastructure.
where you have to either associate two resources that otherwise are not associated together, either via depends on or something like that, or, for example, you want to destroy a resource group, so therefore you implicitly mean that you want to destroy everything that's in it as well. Will it work in order of that destruction, as opposed to the way that Terraform does it?
Yeah, a really good question, because lots of people run against that issue, right? The best way and the most explicit way of getting to that state is just to define your parent resource. They do have implicit dependencies, right, or implied dependencies, where if the VNet uses a property of a different resource, then it depends on that, and it will delete in the reverse order, right? But if there are dependencies that don't necessarily depend on an actual output of a different resource, in which case we sometimes end up in situations where it's trying to delete something before it should have deleted something else. Or it's trying to create something before it can, in the wrong order. So the graphing is similar to Terraform. Yeah, if there's no direct dependency, if there's no direct reference, Pulumi does not know that they are supposed to be related or that they're supposed to be deployed in order. Because that's really, it's either knowledge that humans have, right? Like, I can't deploy this if this doesn't exist. It's nothing that the APIs know about, because the APIs usually don't care. It would be something that Pulumi would have to put into their providers to say, well, if the user tries to deploy this thing, then they also must deploy something else. But what if that something else has already been deployed by something else in a different Pulumi stack, for example, by a different department? Then that whole logic falls apart.
I think that one is still, I mean, you look at most of it, that lies on the developer himself to actually take the responsibility and understand. It's like the same thing as database referencing, where if you delete the parent and all the child's in less room, hanging, it's you who have to
Yeah.
That's a bit different because, I mean, to use the example that's part of Azure. You have a resource group with a virtual machine in it, but you assign a resource group lock. That lock and that virtual machine have no relationship to each other, yet the parent is, or the common denominator is the resource group. But you can't put, according to Terraform's own documentation, you should not put depends on absolutely everywhere.
Yeah.
So therefore, you wish to delete a resource, that VM, you can't, because there's a resource group lock. And if you delete that manually and try to do an apply, Terraform will want to try and re-add it. So you fall into this loop where even down to pipelining, you can't really effectively do it when with certain resources. I'm not saying this is true of everything, but it's that circular problem. So to say it's kind of like a developer problem, developer and who? I mean, from Terraform's point of developers, yes, but not from ours, because we're limited in what we can do. Either break Terraform's best practice or Pulumi's.
I think the problem itself has not been thought out properly, because if you would have really thought of the whole, a long-term problem, you would have thought that this should probably sit in a child resource or another resource that in future might need to be deleted. Because the thing is, you have to look at the overall full picture of that, what's going to be the future state of this same thing. And if you cannot plan that, then you cannot, because it's a very difficult issue for, I don't know.
So the whole resource group lock thing is an interesting, and I know you're just using that as one example, because there are other examples. With resource locks, if you need to delete something inside of a resource group, the whole resource group should go, right? Not just one thing, because resource group should be, the resource group's life cycle should apply to everything inside of that resource group. But that said, I totally understand what you're saying. And right now, it's up to us. So we've all got a job in the future. Yeah. If it was easy, yeah, we'd all be out of a job. And we'd all be looking at robots doing this thing. Machine learning will help, yeah. All right. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Oh, good question. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So there's an Azure DevOps pipeline extension. I'm a contributor to that. Actually, my very first TypeScript contribution, which worked pretty much straight away. I was very surprised. So integration into pipelines, you're going to end up in the same situation that you're in with any other tool to deploy, right? Deploying infrastructure, especially in demos, always looks very easy and straightforward. But as soon as you get into reality and you've got all these orchestration dances that you have to dance to actually get something into production, your pipelines are going to become quite messy. That's just my experience. I might be doing it wrong. Yeah, so there's an Azure DevOps pipeline extension for Pulumi on the marketplace that you can pull in. It does everything that the binary does locally. So it does your update, preview, update, stack selection, all of that stuff. But yeah, the whole orchestration is still up to you. Sorry.
If it's a newer product, that it might be something you take into consideration and kind of have a bit more available than we do for Terraform. Probably because it's a Microsoft product, we tend to have more available for the Microsoft products rather than, even though it's supposed to be open source, but we don't tend to have a lot available. You always have to write a script to do what you need it to do.
Yeah, Well, that's what I mean by the holy PowerShell or Bash script in production. Most things in production just hang by somebody's poorly written PowerShell script or well-written PowerShell script. Yeah. Like, it's always one thing to see things on stage and in a demo, and I know that. It's like Pulumi update, and it deploys, and it's great, and it works. And then you take that away, and you sit down at your desk tomorrow morning, and you try to apply this just theoretically or conceptually to your pipeline, to your thing, to your infrastructure. You're like, how do I get my project manager like in between this preview and update, and how do I get this working, and how do I get my service provider to approve this express route connection peering in here somehow, and suddenly you're in this mess that I always call the orchestration dance into production. Yeah. Yeah, it's never really that clear cut. Sorry to burst people's bubbles. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. It was fun. Never had so many questions. But yeah, I really do like having these questions and these sort of events. Yeah, maybe see you again, maybe at WinOps or something like that. Thank you.
Thanks so much for taking time to
Absolutely.
fly over, although I know it's kind of hard.